Record. All right. I'm thrilled that Judith is offering this session with us. I know so many people have asked, when are we going to learn with her again? So it's great. It's like, here we are. Yay. And this is our second in this series of Cheshbon HaNefesh, doing a soul accounting as we prepare for the high holidays. So I am going to turn it over now to Judith.
So wonderful to see so many familiar faces from TBZ, and also a few other people that I know, and I'm thrilled that everyone has been able to join today. And I want to also, if possible, open up during the session a few times so that we'll be able to have some conversation together. But given the number of people who are here, I think I'm going to need to ask Rav Tiferet to help by taking a look in the chat. And if people are going to want to ask questions or make comments, please, as we're going through, feel free to say things that you want to say in the moment in the chat, and I'll try to pause and give an opportunity both for immediate making statements, but or asking questions, and also perhaps Rav Tiferet will be able to tell me what people are saying in the chat, because I have not really able to keep track of the chat at the same time as I'm trying to offer what I have to say about these complicated texts. So our topic for today is one aspect of teshuva that I think we're very familiar with, and that is called by the rabbis Bein Adam L'Chavero, between a person and a person's fellow human being. That is, between ourselves, between myself and other people, between ourselves and other people. And I think perhaps many people are familiar with the fact that in the Mishnah, the last Mishnah in the tractate Yoma, which is about Yom Kippur, we're told that Yom Kippur gives atonement, creates atonement for sins between ourselves and God. Bein Adam L'Makom, it says. But Bein Adam L'Chavero, but between human beings and other human beings, Yom Kippur does not grant atonement unless ad she'yiratzeh et chavero, until a person has yiratzeh, well, it's usually translated has appeased a fellow human being. I always have trouble with this word appease. I guess it comes from the generation that I belong to, where appeasement has very difficult political associations as a kind of weakness, and not failing to confront evil. And that's not the meaning of appease, obviously, that's meant here, but rather it's usually taken as a synonym for another Hebrew word, lifayes, which means something like to soothe, to make things smoother, better. And it's that sense that the Mishnah seems to have in mind. That is that, and I'll just take one of the traditional commentaries here on this Mishnah, that it's necessary to lifayes, to soothe, to make things better with another person until that other person is ready to forgive, and to specifically forgive the particular transgression that one is acknowledging. And the commentator goes on to say, even if what one has done has been to hurt somebody through words, or it's then necessary to also try to make make some sort of reconciliation, and also one needs to humble oneself, in the process of asking for forgiveness, and and maintain that humility until there is a sense of forgiveness between two people. And I think we often hear then the way the Maimonides, the Rambam, picks up this idea and talks about approaching a person as many as 3 times over over and over. If the person can't grant forgiveness the first time, to go back a second time and to go back a third time. But then, according to the Rambam, if after 3 genuinely sincere efforts on the part of the one who's transgressed, the one who's been transgressed against refuses to forgive, then the transgression remains part of the world of the transgressed rather than the transgressor. So we could spend a lot of time talking about this. My point in bringing this is that it sounds as though there's a fairly straightforward process here. We understand that there needs to be acknowledgement on the part of the one who has done something wrong, and a actual effort to make things better with the person who has been on the recipient of this wrong action, or these painful words, these hurtful words, or whatever form of transgression we're talking about against other people. And my theme for today is, it's not so simple. It's actually, as we all know, in human relations, things are extremely complex. And so what I wanted to do today was for us to spend some time looking at one of the primary texts in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, that actually addresses this process of sinning Bein Adam L'Chavero, and some kind of teshuva. And I'm saying some kind of teshuva because I really do read this text as one that's extremely complicated in the presentation of repentance, of teshuva, that it gives us. Although our tradition absolutely considers this to be the example of teshuva, and the main actor here being David HaMelech, King David, becomes in our tradition the example of one who has done teshuva. So I'm really interested in taking that fact of our tradition and making it complicated, and I hope deepening our sense of how serious an effort this needs to be, or can be, and perhaps see what we might learn from it. So the text, if you got the various messages that Rav Tiferet sent ahead of time, the texts are chapters 11 and 12 from the second book of Samuel. And what I'm hoping to do here is to rather quickly summarize and look at a few points in the actual story of what he does, of what David does, and then spend much more time in the encounter that he then goes through with a different understanding of what he has done, which occurs in chapter 12 of 2 Samuel. So Rav Tiferet, if you could put up on the screen now, I'm not going to read through all of this, but rather try to summarize it. And again, in another preliminary comment, want to try to tell this story in a somewhat complicated way because it's told by the biblical author in a way that focuses us on the men in the story, with one short exception. The second crucial person here is a woman who is almost, not completely, but almost silent, and with one exception, in many ways rendered invisible. Certainly her inner life, and even her personality are invisible by our biblical author. So I'm going to summarize this, but I'm going to point things out in a way that try to tell both of the stories that is in line with the biblical author, and in a way that offers a kind of counter narrative. So we're told, first of all, in the narrative, that we've arrived at a time in the life of King David when he is fully in command. He has defeated all his enemies. He is the king over the entire nation, both what after his death will become the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. They're not divided. It's a united monarchy. He has been incredibly successful as a battle commander. And our story opens at a time which seems to be the spring. It's described as the season when kings go out to battle. L'Eit Tzeit HaMelachim. This is, it looks as though it says malachim, meaning messengers, but it's understood by the Masoretic tradition, by the way we read this as when the kings go out, milachim, and that's the springtime after it stopped raining. What we're told, though, is that David, who has been so successful as a battle commander, therefore been the kind of king that the people had desired, as all now, instead of going out himself, he's sending. He sends out the troops, and he sends out his his general, his battle commander Joab, and this verb of sending, in fact, sending people who will act for him, and involving messengers and other people who do whatever he wants, becomes one of the themes here that we were paying attention to. And I just want to immediately alert us to this. So he's sending out other people to do battle for him, and he himself seems to be living a rather luxurious life, taking naps in the afternoon. And when he gets up from his afternoon nap, he goes out on the roof of his palace, and he sees Vayar. He sees a woman bathing, rochetzet, on the roof of her house, and she's a very beautiful woman. So this is famously, we've learned from film criticism. What is this? We are invited to be with him, it's the male gaze, looking at a woman who seems to assume that she is in a completely private situation. She's on the roof of her house. She doesn't expect to be overlooked. And in fact, presumably, the only person who would be able to see her would be the king in his palace, which is higher than other people's dwellings. And he looks at her and now immediately does another piece of sending. He's sending out presumably to somebody in the household. So immediately his interest in her is clearly going to be known to other people. He sends out and wants to know who she is, and is told, or maybe he himself is the one who's asking somebody else, isn't this Bathsheba, who's the daughter of Eliam, who is, and Eliam is known in other parts of the text as one of David's inner circle, actually, one of his counselors. And who's also the wife of Uriah the Hittite, who's one of his most important warriors, one of the important soldiers in his army. So she's somebody who is associated with people extremely well known, not only to David, but to the entire inner circle of his court. And David then again sends out messengers, Vayikacheha, and she was taken, is how we need to translate this. She was taken. So it seems that there are people who are ready to do whatever he wants. It's completely well known that she's a married woman, that she's married to somebody who is part of the inner circle. She's a woman who has some status, who has part of the inner circle. Nevertheless, there are messengers who are ready to do what he wants. And she's taken presumably into the palace, and he has sex with her. Vayishkav ima means that he has sex with her, and then he mitkadeshet mitumata. Now, our translation here says she had just purified herself after her period. The text does not say that at all. It's a common misunderstanding. Thanks to Tikva Freimer-Kensky, Alea Shalom, remarkable Bible scholar, who points out that, in fact, what is happening here has nothing to do with her period, but it is, and the text never says that, but rather that it's a sign that they have had sex. And according to the biblical law in Leviticus, when people have sexual intercourse, they need to become ritually pure after that, and that she does. And then she goes back into her house. Through all of this, we hear nothing from her. We know nothing about her feelings. We know nothing about what this might mean to her. The one clue we have is Vayikacheha. She is not an actor here. She's the object of the verb. So I want to suggest that through this episode, what happens is that it's written in such a way that we too are involved in gazing at her, seeing her as an object, as the readers, and that this is already in some ways a transgression in relation to her. This is not usually the way we think about this. We usually think that the transgression is more overt, that we don't know. There's the possibility that she feels forced into this. Some feminist scholars read it that way, and Also, one feminist scholar describes her as raped by the pen because of the way the story is written. That is in forcing her, that we are included, as it were, in forcing her into this position. But the fact is that she has been involved in adultery with David, but she goes back to her household, and immediately she becomes pregnant. Vatahar Harisha, and this is the only time we hear her voice. She's the one who's sending, and she tells David, Hara Anochi, I am pregnant. And I'm underlining that I am pregnant. Anochi, that's the way in which significant statements are made by someone who is an important subject. I am pregnant. And David then immediately starts more sending. He sends for Uriah, who the husband, who's out with the army. The whole army's been sent out, right? He sends for him, wants him to come back. And now I'm going to quickly go through this. He has Uriah come back, and with just a kind of almost perfunctory request to Uriah to tell him what's going on with the army, which clearly he would already know about because his general's reporting to him all the time. David spends a lot of time trying to get Uriah to go home and sleep with his wife. And Uriah, the character of Uriah actually is sketched out for us in quite remarkably, and essentially says when everybody, all of the king's army is out there fighting, sleeping in the fields, at risk of their lives in this battle, you want me to go home and eat and drink and sleep with my wife? No, sir, I can't do that. And so he sleeps on the threshold of the palace instead of going home. And everybody's aware of this. Everyone knows this. It's clear because people come and tell David about this. And then David invites him to stay another night, tries to get him drunk, hoping that then he will sort of forget about his scruples. Doesn't happen. Uriah again refuses to leave the palace grounds. And so the next day, David again now sends Uriah as a messenger back to Yoav, bearing a letter. And in that letter are instructions that Uriah should be, the army should send out a troop, a patrol close to the city walls. They should fight close in, and that Uriah should be among them. If we scroll down a little bit farther, let him be struck, let him be wounded, and let him die. David says this. Excuse me. It's a shocker. It's really stunning. He says it out loud. Let him die. That actually happens, and there's a whole exchange between David and Yoav, in which the general, who then sends a message back to David, sending a message back to David to tell him about this foray that the patrol had made and how a number of people died there, and if David should say to the messenger who brings him this message, why did you do this? Why did you put the soldiers at risk? Don't you remember how dangerous it is to go close to the walls? There was a time when even a woman was able to drop a millstone on top of the soldiers to kill them. It's a very dangerous thing to do. Joab says to the messenger, tell David that among the dead is Uriah the Hittite, Uriah the Hittite. And at the end of this exchange between David and the messenger, David says to tell Joab, if we can scroll down to the very end here, no, one verse back, please. Vayomer David said, tell Joab, let it not be bad in your eyes that this happened, because this is the kind of thing that happens all the time in warfare. It's a kind of stunning callousness, totally callousness, and almost brutal response on David's part. Don't worry about the fact that they died. It's what happens in warfare. In contrast, we hear that Uriah's wife, Eshet Uriah, that's Bathsheba, hears that Uriah had died, and she mourns him, vatispod, meaning, which implies not only that she has through the rituals of mourning, but that there's some sort of speech which we do not hear. So again, I mean, there's a sense in which we have just the barest hint of who she is, what her responses might be, what's going on for her inwardly, what her personality is, nothing. But there's some hint that this was a real marriage, and that she is genuinely mourning him. And then at the end of the period of mourning, then David takes her into his house. She becomes his wife. And this is the last verse of chapter 11. She gives birth to a son to him or for him. And this is absolutely crucial. Vayera hadavar asher asa David b'nei Adonai. The thing that David had done, hadavar, the thing that David had done was bad, was evil in God's eyes. That is, that we have, so if we're thinking about transgression, I want us to see that we have transgression against Bathsheba first, although that's not quite the way our story is written, but it's a transgression against Bathsheba. It's a transgression against Uriah. It's a transgression against God. That God pins it directly on David. No more sending, no more intermediaries. Therefore, no more possibility of distancing. It's Asher Asa David. In God's eyes, this is what David did, period. So I just want to pause very briefly here to give you a chance to ask a question, ask for clarification, make a comment if you want to, just for a minute or two here, if anyone wants to do that. Is there anything? I see a hand from Diane here.
The question I have is this the first time there's a transgression of this sort? In other words, what I was thinking about is that, to modernize it only slightly, it's a kind of transgression you'd think about that happens in a nation state.
Yes.
Not that there aren't crimes of sexual mistreatment or, crimes and warfare before that, but this is very particular where a king does it, our king, and uses his power in a particular way. So that was really what I was thinking about, which is somewhat of a commentary on patriarchy, nation states, really. And
Yes. So thank you for that question, comment, Diane. Absolutely, this is actually the point that the larger point that Tikva Freimer-Kensky makes, that what we're seeing here is abuse of power, and that what we are starting to learn is that this institution of monarchy, which the people had desired, presumably because they felt that it was a way of protecting themselves, it doesn't work very well, and that it ends up creating more problems than it solves. So yes, I mean, I think that that's an important element here, that all of this sending that David is able to do, involving all kinds of other people, and expecting them to do what he wants, without him having to face any consequences, seems to be highlighted in this story by this constant use of this verb of sending, and the messengers going back and forth and all of that.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm trying to keep my eye on the time, and so let's. I would like us to really. I'm going to read together what then happens. So immediately, it's not just that God considers this a bad thing, but that God acts. We have God, and God acts through this institution, which those of us who remember Ronald Reagan and Elie Wiesel may remember, that there's an institution of prophecy in these so sort of historical books, in which the prophet is the one who speaks truth to power, as the voice of God, is the channel through which the judgment of God is rendered. And this is, in the case of David, it's Natan, who is, there's sending of the prophet by God to David. And instead of Bathsheba coming into the household and David then coming into her, which is in the sexual sense, we have Natan, the prophet, coming to David, also in an intimate way, to speak to him about his spiritual state, which is a state of having distanced himself from God, because he has committed a sin, Bein Adam L'Chavero. And the way he lets David know this is to immediately launch into a parable. So here's the parable. There were two men in the city, one rich and one poor. The rich man had very large flocks and herds. The poor man, the Rosh, had only one little ewe lamb, kivsa achat ketana. So this is a female lamb that he had bought. And he tended it. It grew up together with him and his children. It used to share his morsel of bread, drink from his cup. Now they translate nestle in his bosom. Probably better translation is it would lie in his lap. And it was like a daughter to him. And one day a traveler came to the rich man. And again, here the translation has, he was loath to take anything from his own flocks. But the Hebrew is vayachmo lakachat mitzono. So he had mercy on his own flocks. And it's a very pointed language here in which Natan is suggesting that this rich man is having mercy on what belongs to him, on himself, but not having mercy, being cruel to what belongs to the poor man, right? So he wouldn't take from his own flocks to prepare a meal for the guest, but rather took the poor man's, it's vayikach, that same verb that was used in relation to Bathsheba, took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. That's our parable. Now, I just want to stop here for a minute on the parable. I know that it's generally read that, of course, the rich man is David, and the poor man is, because of the gender here, that the poor man is Uriah. And it works perfectly, of course, because David at this point has he already has 6 wives. And Uriah, of course, only has 1 wife. And the lamb is in the female. But again, I'm citing Tikva Freimer-Kensky, who understands it differently, and I think correctly, that the poor man is actually Bathsheba. And the lamb who was taken from her is her husband. And I think if we read the story from the point of view of Bathsheba, it really does work that way. In any event, it's clearly a story of abuse of power. The rich man is understood to be able to do whatever he wants in relation to the poor man, and he's exercising mercy only in relation to himself, doing what he wants, and behaving with cruelty against his fellow, and actually slaughters this lamb, which had been, as it were, a family member.
Judith,
Yes.
I just wanted to bring in something, because this parable is not quite accurate in the sense that it's not just that David took another man's wife and made her pregnant. He then wanted to manipulate him to sleep with his wife so that he would think it was his baby. That didn't work. He sent him into battle to be killed. There's a underhandedness. It would be as if the rich man had taken the lamb, the ewe, and then denied that he'd actually, no, that's not the poor man's ewe, that's somebody else's ewe. There's a manipulative quality here where David, knows he's done something wrong, and now he has to hide it. So it's almost even worse.
That's a very important point, Jill, and thank you very much for bringing that in. No question. That is that he gets involved in this whole dance with Uriah in order to create a cover-up. It seems that he had completely distanced himself from the sin of adultery, and it's only because when she becomes pregnant, and therefore it's going to be obvious that she's had sex with someone while her husband was off, fighting a battle, that David gets involved in trying to get Uriah to come back and sleep with his wife. You're right that it's all about manipulation and cover up, but also the fact is that it's not only that David arranges to have Uriah killed. Well, we'll see what the way in which Natan, the prophet, puts it to him in order to make sure that he is forced into acknowledging what he's been trying to distance himself from. So I just want to now to go on with we're in verse 5. If we can scroll down a little bit, Rav Tiferet. David became enraged at the man whose story Uriah is telling. The person, let's translate it as the person whose story Uriah is telling, this rich man, and says to Natan, taking Chai Hashem, by God, as the Lord lives, as this is an oath. He says, this person deserves death. The one who did this, and this is that same language of who did it, is deserving of death. And he should also make restitution for the lamb that was killed 4 times over, because lo chamal, because he did not have pity. That is, he had pity only for his own desire, his own self, and had no pity on that the poor person. And Natan then, this is one of the most famous phrases in our Bible, Ata Ha'ish, you are that man. You are that man. And this is what God says to you. I anointed you king over Israel. I rescued you from the hand of Shaul. I gave you your master's house and possession of your master's wives. And this is actually literally true. One of David's wives is named Achinoam, whom was earlier identified as a wife of Saul, of Shaul. So gave you possession of your master's wives. I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if that were not enough, I would give you twice as more. Why then have you flouted the command of the Lord? And this is Madua Bazita et Devar Adonai. This is had contempt for what God wants. Why have you done this? La asot ra, and doing. Our translation says, "Done what displeases him." I don't want to involve you in my arguments with the JPS translation a lot, but that is much too mild. You have done evil. You have done really something totally bad. You have put, it translates this as put Uriah to the sword. You have struck, it's hikita, you struck Uriah with the sword. That is David, who had tried so hard to distance himself through all these intermediaries. And this is to take Jill's point quite seriously here. What Nathan is saying to him is, you did it. You killed him. And you took his wife and made her your wife. You killed him by means of, he says this quite out there, the oto haragta, not you had him killed. Our translation is really off on this one. The haragta, you killed him by means of the sword of the Ammonites. You used that the enemy's swords to kill him. And then he proceeds to tell David what the consequence of this is going to be, which is, I'm going to skip through this a little bit quickly. The sword will never depart from your house, because you, and again, it's you spurned me by taking the wife of Uriah the Hittite and making her your wife. There's going to be calamity, disaster coming to you through your own household. Your own wives are going to be given to another man. And you were trying to cover up. You tried to act in secret, but it's all going to happen in the light of day. And at this point, we hear, and this is where we understand David to be the Baal Tshuva. He says to Natan, Chatati Lashem, I have sinned in relation to God. So I want to just to stop here and just look at this. I have sinned in relation to God. There's something missing here in a truly powerful way. There's no question that it's absolutely important that David acknowledges this, that he says, Chatati Lashem, I have sinned against God. And we can, as generous readers of this, have always read that, and we can be generous readers and say, that means that he acknowledges everything that he has done to the human beings involved, but he doesn't say that out loud. And so I'm wanting to suggest that, again, we are swept up in our tradition itself. Our traditional readers have and many of us as readers of the biblical text have been swept up in this ourselves by the power of this biblical narrative in saying that David is a Baal Tshuva here. He's not a master of tshuva. He's someone who's approaching, at least taking some of the steps toward tshuva here when he acknowledges this. And in response to this, Natan, as God's prophet, says to him that God is, they translate it remitted. God has modified the consequences of your sin, and you will not die. We use exactly this same verb, he'evir, when we say tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah, ma'avirin et roa hagzera, that prayer and taking care of the needy, tzedakah, and tshuva will modify the strictness, the difficulty of the judgment, the gezerah, which is in store for us. We say this over and over again in our Rosh Hashanah prayers. So this, and you can see the way in which the liturgy has picked up on this way of understanding this text exactly here. Adonai he'evir chatatcha, God has modified the consequence of your sin. You will not die. But because you have, we have a little euphemism here, where the text is saying, because you have been contemptuous of, you have spurned God, but it can't say that. Can't say you spurned God. That's too horrifying. And so it says you've spurned the enemies of God, but it's actually that you've spurned God through badavar, through this deed, what you did. The child who was born to you, that is, and this is a piece, I think, a piece of this of biblical understanding of family relations that we have a hard time with. The idea is that the child is going to that's the child will die, and what we immediately hear is that God caused this child to become ill by Yigof. It's a language that we're familiar with from the plagues of Egypt. God's, and in this case, it's some sort of illness that comes to the child. But the child is described as the child Asher Yalda Eshet Uriah LeDavid, the child whom Uriah's wife, now she's now David's wife, but our text is referring to her as Uriah's wife. Why should that be? Because we have to understand that he has not done a full teshuva here.
No.
In some senses, she remains Uriah's wife, whom he has taken illegitimately, and that it's being brought home to us as the readers, to David himself, that through the illness of this child, and we then have this quite moving and yet painful scene presented to us of David begging God for on behalf of the child, fasting, spending the whole night lying on the ground, begging God. Everybody, all these members of his household trying to get him to eat. He refuses to eat. But after 7 days, of course, 7 significant days, the child dies. All these people who are surrounding him are terrified to tell him that the child died. They're worried about what kind of reaction he's going to have. But when he hears them whispering all around him, he perceives that the child must have died. And immediately, he gets up, he washes himself, he anoints himself, he changes his clothes. This is what you do when you are no longer in the presence of someone who has died, and you're no longer in a situation of begging God for mercy. He goes into the sanctuary instead and bows down in front of God, presumably understanding himself to be in a condition of reconciliation. He eats, and they don't understand this at all. What is this about? And why did you do this? You fasted, you wept all the time the child was alive. Now the child is dead. What are you doing? You're acting as though nothing has happened. And he says, while the child was alive, I wept and I fasted because I thought, who knows? Mi yodea, who knows? Maybe God will have pity on me and let the child live. Have pity on me and let the child live. But now that he is dead, what's the point of fasting? He says, ha'uchal lahashivo od ani. Could I bring him back? Rather, ani holech ilav, v'hu lo yashuv elai. I am going to go to him, and he will never come back to me. It's a deeply painful expression on David's part, a kind of recognition that he is a mere human being in relation to God, on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's all about him. He's seeing that what happened is God's punishment to him, and that the punishment means that he's not going to have more offspring who belong to him, who carry his name. He already has quite a few children, but this particular child, if it had lived, would have been some kind of validation, presumably letting him off the hook. So I'm going to stop here with the text, the narrative, and say that when I read this, I feel as though what we have in front of us is a model of the incredible complexity of the process that we are asking ourselves to take on in this time of, not only in this time of year, but actually we need to understand it as something that is a constant in our lives. It's just that we focus on it in particular at this time of year. It's enormously complex. There are parts of it in which David is absolutely a voice that gives expression to the power of acknowledgement, of facing up to what we have done, but also someone who is, in my eyes at least, someone who teaches us how much more far-reaching we have to be than simply acknowledging to ourselves what it is that we've done. And he leaves hanging everything that he has done in relation to the significant other actors, Bathsheba, and in fact, he has killed Uriah, and therefore we're left with a completely unexamined and not understood concept of teshuva in relation to someone who has died.
Mm.
How can we do that? David does not teach us that. And I think it's a piece of our traditional teachings that we really need to look much further to try to find. What can we do, if anything, in terms of teshuva in relation to someone who has died? God forbid that it should be someone whose death we have caused ourselves, but it is actually an open question suggested by this text. And I just want to also add the further complexity that because of the way this text is written, it's easy to forget that there's a whole teshuva in relation to Bathsheba, which is also left hanging here. Perhaps there's something that David does finally at the end, when at the instigation of Bathsheba, he acknowledges that the child that she then bears to him after this, who is Solomon, Shlomo, he grants that Solomon should be his heir at Bathsheba's urging. But that's a long way in the future. So we only have a couple of minutes left, but I want to open this up now for your comments and responses. So Jill, you want to weigh in here?
I was just going to say, I mean, I was about to say what you had said about his not taking responsibility for Bathsheba and what he did to her. But I was so struck when he said, I have sinned against God. And he just never mentioned, that he had how much pain he had caused Bathsheba. And even the servants that were sent to bring her back, he made them co-conspirators in this whole cover-up. So he did a lot of harm and he hurt a lot of people. And it was so striking how he didn't take responsibility for the people that he had hurt. It was really, that's so striking.
Yes. And I do think our biblical text wants us to look this straight in the eye and say, you wanted a king, you got one. Anyone else want to say something? Susie.
Yes, thank you so much for this teaching and learning opportunity, Judith. So I was struck in this reading of the text today that the sin against God, immediately Natan says, okay, God has changed Roa Hagzera, changed the outcome. No, this is not a death offense. But I took that as the part where you sinned against God. Okay, God could forgive to some degree. God has allowed for this institution of the kingdom and kings with their too much power, even though he cautioned the Israelites not to have a king before they asked for a king, starting back with Saul. But all that follows in the suffering is all about the sins, Bein Adam L'Chavero. It's all about his human transgressions against other human beings that are not quickly or easily forgiven. And while Solomon maybe becomes his heir, and perhaps in this place where Bathsheba had no voice, she had no power, earlier on, he goes and he comforts her, and then they have this child together. She's also lost a child that was conceived by his taking her, or if we know by force. We don't know if she was in any way willing for this to happen, and we don't understand the power dynamics where she could even have a voice in that. David will never get to see that temple built because it has to come from a person of peace, and it's related to, I don't know, but there's no way he can make it up to Uriah what he has done to him. There's no way he can make it up to Bathsheba. There's no way he can make it up to the people who he forced to be complicit in all of his many steps of the ruse. And this innocent child who dies.
Thank you. So I see Ronnie.
So there's one other little piece here, which is the only place where David does get confronted personally. And that's that the next couple of verses, Yoab, who is his military commander, sends to him a note that says, listen, man, if you don't come here now and take over charge, I'm going to take this victory. And so it's the only place where David sort of, who's busy sending, where somebody comes into his face and says, you are the man, you show up and you do it.
Thank you. Yes, we didn't look further in chapter 12, but you're right. So Deborah.
I just want to add a contemporary language to this entire story, which is that within the conversation of veterans. They speak very much now about the complicit nature of these senders
Mhm.
as moral injury.
Moral injury. Yeah.
Moral injury.
Yeah.
And that's enough said.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Deborah. That's extremely important.
Mhm.
So, yeah, Lev.
Just a quick comment, and I'm a little bit spacey because I'm still recovering from COVID. You may have covered this, but what I'm struck by is what David lacks, and what's perhaps the biblical commentators are wanting us to take away from not seeing it at all, is any kind of empathy.
Mhm.
There's zero empathy. He has no empathy for Bathsheba, no empathy for Uriah. So just a quick comment.
Right. The one slight hint there is that after the death of the child, we're told that David comforted his Bathsheba, Vayinachem. He comforted her. So perhaps there's some slight hint, but then immediately he's resuming sexual relations with her, and she gives birth to Shlomo. So we've been caught up in monarchic politics. But I know that we're past our proper time. So I would like to, in good rabbinic tradition, end on something more positive note, to suggest, we don't have time to look at this together, but the Psalm, traditionally David is understood to be the author of most of the Psalms, and the Psalm that later that was attributed to David at the time when Nathan the prophet came to him after he had come to Bathsheba, and you notice the pun there, is Psalm 51. And it is one of the most magnificent and beautiful of the Psalms of expressing penitence, teshuva. It is the teshuva Psalm, Psalm 51. And I invite you to look in your Tanakh and to take it to heart. And that in the midst of this psalm, we have a verse which is part of, we'll hear it at Slichot on Saturday night. It's one of the most poignant and moving verses in Slichot. Al tashlicheni mi panecha, baruach kodshecha, al tikach mimeni. Verse 13, do not cast me out of your presence or take your Holy Spirit away from me. Al tashlicheni milfanecha, v'ruach kodshecha al tikach mimeni. So that's how I would want to end this, and wish everyone a Shana Tova, and may it be a better year for all of us.
Thank you.
So much, Judith.
Thank you so
Judith.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So excellent.
Judith.
So excellent.
So miss your teaching.